Hey, just gonna give a quick demo of this user control I created called Rearranging Grid. This is the demo of said project. So what it does is it allows a threshold to be set for either the width or the height. If the either width or height goes beneath that threshold, it'll rearrange the elements inside. So if you watch, this is how actually wide it is. So when it becomes narrower, when it gets beneath our threshold of 650, you'll see it move. That's based on what we're setting for when it's in the narrow mode, um, where we want it to go. And this is bindable in this user control, which is pretty cool because in a regular WPF grid, you can't bind the row or the column, but this kind of you can. So let's say we want it to be instead of row 0, row 1. So now when it goes beneath the threshold, it moves down. Same thing with becoming shorter. So when it becomes really short, let's say we want this element to go to column 2 and row 2, and it does that. So when the height goes beneath 500, it'll move. You can also bind the column span or row span. So let's say when it gets really narrow, for some reason you want this element to become bigger. You can do that also with this user control. Or this is probably a more common use case. When it gets really narrow, you want to hide content. Like let's say you have some labels or something kind of silly silly there that you want to get rid of just because it's not that important. You could also hide or show certain columns. So the last column, get out of there. Boom. So that's what this control does. And kind of the inspiration for this control was where I used to work. We had a lot of grids that had grid splitters, and also just windows are resizable in WPF. So we had all these layouts that looked fine, but then if the size changed, it wouldn't look so fine. So then we had to to respond to that, we basically used an I-value converter with multiple elements in XAML, and then when the size would change, the I-value converters would take the actual width or the actual height of the window in as a parameter, and then the I-value converters would return a visibility of either visible, hidden, or collapsed. But then we ended up with a XAML with if there was multiple spots where let's say this button could be on resizing, um, we'd have 2 or 3 buttons in the XAML, or and when you were looking at the XAML, you kind of wouldn't know exactly which one was supposed to be shown when. And the beauty of this control is it allows you to use the same element and just attach a property onto that element, telling you where you want it to go. So this button, see if I can show both these things here. So this button is this right here. So kind of I was talking about where I worked before, we would have multiple buttons defined in XAML and just kind of hide them. But this uses just the same element, and you can see the attached properties here. So this narrow row is set to 1, now 3, so that's this property here. And you can go through all these properties are bindable, which like I said is pretty cool because for the normal WPF grid, all those things were like the row and the height are read only. So that's kind of what's going on here. All these blue borders are defined right here. And the reason that you can hide or show these columns is because I found online, I didn't create it, but I found a pretty cool class for hideable column definition and hideable row definition. So you can just define the grid with those classes, and then that will allow you to bind the visible property. So I guess kind of walking through the actual code here. Here's the hideable column definition, row definition. Here's the user control I made called Rearranging Grid. Notice all the dependency properties are attached properties, because just like the grid, you put the property on the element inside the grid, not on the actual grid. So that's kind of the reason they're attached properties. Kind of the way it works is it listens for the size changed event, checks if it's the height that's changed or whether it's the width that's changed. If it's the height that's changed, it checks its actual height compared to the threshold that was being set. If the height's less than the threshold, it comes in here, actually does the rearranging. So let's say if the short row is different than its current row, loop through and change everything that's different. If the short column is different than the regular column, go ahead and loop through and change everything that's different, and so on and so forth. I guess kind of show you there's 3 different modes. You probably picked that up already, but for this rearranging grid, there's the short mode, regular, and the narrow mode. So that's kind of how it works. Hopefully you understood that.